My motivation for the exhibition began in the wake of the fall of countries that had been based on communist governments, primarily China and the Soviet Union, and that was at a time where people started to write about utopia not being a model that one could really use in society, and that we were just done with the whole concept of utopia. And being an art historian, and also being an art historian who studies 19th century art movements, I realized that in fact many artists' colonies and artistic collectives and communities and brotherhoods that began in the wake of the French Revolution and in the wake of the Enlightenment through to the early 20th century, and even through till today, certainly based their organization and were underpinned by utopian ideas. And that was really the genesis of the exhibition, to think about how do artistic groups engage with utopian ideas. And I specifically chose a range to show that it's something that goes across a long period of time. If there had been another museum, we could have had a whole section that went from where this exhibition stops, which is in 33, up to the present. I began where I did at the beginning of the 19th century, end of the 18th century, because I felt that until that point, the idea of an artist having individual agency or being able to break away and form a collective wasn't really a possibility, because most artistic activity was, of course, controlled by a pope or the church or a king or a dynasty of some kind. And thus the exhibition, in fact, ranges from a group of French students of Jacques-Louis David's who leave his studio because they're dissatisfied with him and think he's not following the ideals of an archaic Greek purity enough in the way he painted, and I think also in his sort of value system. And they go off and live in an abandoned convent, and I call them the proto-bohemians because they really try to follow this pure lifestyle. They meditate, they grow their beards, they wear robes. And I tried to address many different nationalities within the Western world to show that this wasn't something specific to France or to Europe. There's also an American group. So you range from brotherhoods, some which are monastic, like the Primitif to a certain degree, this French group, others who are monastic and religious, such as the Nazarenes, who are the next brotherhood I address, all the way through to movements such as the Cornish Art Colony in America, an aesthetic movement, a colony formed by artists of the aesthetic movement who were not at all religious or politicized, and really were more interested in a completely orchestrated aesthetic experience, and the ideal being sort of the beautification of the environment in which one lives, and that would lead to more elevated existence. I feel that you needed this huge political break that happened with the revolutions both in France and America to reconsider how you could structure society. The idea that you could have a democratic or egalitarian society, and one where there's parity, ostensibly, of course, it's never quite that way, but really wasn't a model that existed before in any dramatic kind of way. And I think it took that, and I took Enlightenment philosophers and what they had written to really infiltrate more the culture of the Western world to lead to these kinds of ideas. But I think as the 19th century progressed, also the Industrial Revolution has a lot to do with why artists wanted to create collectives and these ideal little artistic communities. On the one hand, because the Industrial Revolution led to large cities and sort of the loss of individuality and made things ugly, said very simply. So some people wanted to retreat and make things beautiful. The Industrial Revolution also created a mode of working where the handcrafted was no longer made or valued, and the act of labor itself had lost a connection to the act of creation, and that being something that could give you happiness or give you joy. So it was so in the case of someone like William Morris or even the Pre-Raphaelites, it's about returning a certain value to the making of something. And many of these groups harken back to the Middle Ages and the idea of the guild. But it also had to do with wanting to try to transform society and work against the evil effects of the Industrial Revolution and give people an option. You could recreate your space where you live to make it a better place. And once you recreate things and remake things in a small way, I mean, this is sort of the point of architecture. If you remake the place where someone lives, you can slowly rebuild society, and you see that idea repeats itself throughout many of the groups of this exhibition. I mean, the Bauhaus emerged in a moment after World War I, where I think all Germans felt this tremendous responsibility to rebuild Germany and to have also an educational system where you could train people in a certain way, go back to the idea of masters and apprentices, and make things that ideally would have been then produced for a larger public. So I think those are important points. What was interesting about working on this exhibition was, while I am a more historical curator and I really stop around World War I, is that I of course have many colleagues and friends who are in the contemporary world, the contemporary artists, and this is a moment in time where there are quite a few artist collectives active. And in fact, like the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, who signed themselves with the initials PRB when they first exhibited their paintings at the Royal Academy in the middle of the 19th century, today you have artist collectives who sign themselves with a name and not with their individual names, and they work as a group always. And so it seems to have a great connection to the present. Also, the whole concept of relational aesthetics and artists who are interested in that, which also engages the interaction of the viewer in some way. So the act of artworks are completed with the participation of the viewer in some aspect or other. And I think that also relates to many of the groups I looked at who are trying to make things that can integrate with how people live. So you have this idea of exchange, which on some level is very important.